You did pretty good in text, too.
Good evening. At this time, I will call to order the business meeting for the Faribault Public Schools School Board here on June 24th, 2024. Ms. Steves, will you determine if we have a quorum present?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we do.
Thank you. At this time, would everyone stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Agenda item number 2 is approval of the agenda. Could I have a motion for approval of the agenda, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Boudreau. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion
Mr.
signify.
Chair, you said you would pull those three, right?
I will take care of
Okay, good.
everything we've talked about before. Yes, I will.
Okay.
Okay. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. On a sub note here, board members, due to the length of our board meeting and many presentations tonight, I will be calling a recess, I'm guessing around the 7 o'clock mark here or whatever, and then before our closed session as well, or any other time that we might think we might need that. So, thank you. Agenda item number 3, recognition, awards, and presentations. We have student school board representatives. First, we are going to recognize you. So, Ms. Julian Huberty, if you would come up to the front here. James Silver is not here this evening, but on behalf of the Faribault Public Schools, we recognize you as you were the student school board representative for the 2023-2024 school year. So congratulations and thank you so much. Also, on behalf of the Faribault Public School Board, I want to express our sincere appreciation to our student school board representatives, Jillian and James. Your efforts to represent students and advocate for positive changes have improved our school community. We are truly impressed by your dedication to academic performance, participation in extracurricular activities, and advocacy for your peers. Your leadership, tenacity, and enthusiasm have not gone unnoticed, and we are generally grateful for your positive impact on our school board. We appreciate how you prioritize listening to your fellow students and making sure their voices are heard. Thank you for your commitment to ensuring our schools provide a high quality and equitable education that nurtures, inspires, challenges, and empowers our students to engage and grow as learners and citizens. I'm pleased to announce that Jillian Huberty will continue as student school board representative, and I warmly welcome Ayan Abdi as our new representative for the 2024-2025 school year. Thank you, James, Jillian, and Ayan, for representing your peers and advocating on their behalf. Thank you so much. So with that, I believe we have a report.
Yeah, so, do you want to say your name? Yes, I'll let you say it.
Hi, I'm this New Year student representative. My name is Ayan Abdi.
Can you talk into the mic a little more?
You can hear me? Okay. My name is Ayan Abdi.
You can scream into it, that's fine.
All right, so we just have a quick little report tonight about what the District Youth Council is working on. So we are participating in this project called the Photo Voice Project, which is through the Positive Community Norms Grant, focusing on substance abuse prevention towards youth in the Faribault community. So the grant coordinator, Angie Ramirez, and youth engagement leader, Ashlyn Zerbriggen, are working with District Youth Council members at the high school. And the primary objective of the project is for youth to show us hope and concern in their community through photos they take themselves. So basically what this project is it's a way for youth when they're out in the community, if they see a form of substances or drugs to take a picture and then submit it in this app. Yeah. Submit it in this app. And then what we will do is after all these photos have been submitted, we'll have the opportunity to vote on which ones will be printed and then hung up in the community. So it's a way to show adults and community members what youth are seeing of substances, right? Because adults may see one thing and might think that alcohol is an issue or might think that vaping is an issue and only know certain aspects of it. But how do we know what youth, right, see and what kinds of things that they are noticing from that youth lens, so that way we can work on substance prevention by recognizing what kids are seeing. So it's a great project where district youth council members will, whenever they're out in the community, if they see anything, they'll snap a picture. It's all anonymous. They will submit a photo, and then at the end, we'll come together, we'll vote, and we'll make like a poster kind of showing different pictures of what are found in the community. And this entire thing is anonymous. No pictures would be allowed that like review a person or a specific like place, but just show what substance abuse looks like. So that'll be a great thing that we will be working on over this summer. And then I hope to report back to you probably that September meeting about our results and everything that we found from the Photo Voice project.
Wow, interesting, excellent, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Olson,
can I have a question?
Yeah.
certainly.
You can take pictures of precisely of drug deals?
No, it would be more in the sense of if you're walking out of the community center and you saw a vape on the ground, right? You take a picture of that. Or you saw a bag of something that looked suspicious, right? Not people, but we're focusing on the substance or the product itself.
Okay.
Because what you might recognize as like a vape or a certain device, we might think of 5 other things that have already been on the market that you would look at and have no clue that that is a substance abuse product. And so it kind of opens up the eyes of community members to see from that youth lens.
Just be careful.
Yeah?
Be very, very
Yep,
careful.
it's nothing to do with people. That's not the focus of it. It is completely to bring awareness to what an object, a device, a substance itself looks like. Nothing with people, specific places, nothing like that. Yeah.
Super. Okay, we'll move on to 4B. School board members, items of information. Anything anyone would like to share?
Mr. Chair?
Ms. Moore?
Okay. I've got actually a couple things, so I'll try to keep it brief. Yeah. A while back, can you hear me now? A while back, I visited those in the music department at the Faribault Middle School. And as a parent and grandparent, I'm familiar with, teens rolling their eyes and the weird, disgusting looks that you get sometimes, But I have to say I had an experience with one student that I really have to share. And before I met with the music teachers, I needed to check into the office. But somehow I walked past and then proceeded to lose my way. I think I was looking at something on the wall or something. And so my sense of direction, you have to know, is not that great. So I walked around for a bit thinking I could find the office, but then I saw an open door in a classroom, and I walked up to the door, and the gracious teacher asked if she could help. I said I needed directions to the school office. And one young man popped up and offered, and during the walk to the office, we had a very, very nice conversation. He was very polite. He was very respectful. He, in fact, called me ma'am, which I was surprised at. And when we got to the office, he opened the door for me. I was very impressed by both the courtesy and the helpfulness of the teacher and the student. And I can't remember their name right now, but I think that young man should be a role model for each and every one of us. And I don't know his name, but let's give him a round of applause. Okay, secondly, I've got two more things. it's a more serious note. I am, and maybe I should talk about this later. I don't know if this is the right time or not. But I am very concerned about what's happening to our teachers as expressed by the last survey that our mental health coordinator is going to be going over later this evening. And then as a school board member, I think we all need to know what is going on with our teachers. I've been told that teachers are not supposed to communicate with school board members. I don't think, for me, that's not acceptable. And I would say to the teachers, please reach out to us. We can't help you if we don't know what's going on. And the third thing is, more of on a happy note here, there's a nice write-up about STEAM in the Faribault Daily News. I don't know if any of you have seen that. I think it was on 2 full pages. And I think that was a really good program. And they were talking about pollinators. And I happen to actually know this person. She's a master gardener, and she's very good at what she does. And I was very glad to see her teaching that day. So thank you. That's it.
Any other board members? I would like to thank the board members who were able to attend the graduation ceremony on June 2nd, I believe it was, Sunday afternoon. A great event, well attended as usual, and great to see the success of those kids and be part of that process. So, nothing else. Mr. Benty, items of information.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Since our last business meeting, the big topic was graduation, where we had graduations at the kindergarten level, at the 5th grade level, moving into middle school. This year, new was an 8th grade graduation moving to high school, and they ran 2 ceremonies to be able to get all the students through. Incredibly well attended by our families, and very well done, I thought, by the middle school staff. And it was nice to see how excited those students were to be graduating from middle school and heading off to high school. And then, of course, our high school graduation, as Mr. Chair alluded to. The work this summer has been hectic. I've been almost busier this summer than I was during the school year. So a lot of work, a lot of prepping. Cabinet, along with principals, have been meeting quite often to plan upcoming school years, upcoming back to school, which is not that far away, to be honest with you. And just everything that we need to get done before that time rolls in. We have the board will see, we have over 40 policy updates that are coming to us this summer that have to be enacted sometime either before school starts or by the middle of this school year. The majority of them before school starts. The packet that Ms. Kenny put together was 287 pages of policy updates. So there is a lot of updates that are coming this summer. And then I figured I would give an update. Hopefully those of you that are listening and here did not have any ill effects from all the rain. And Mr. Olson, I know that you said you did not fare so well, your home. But thankfully, we have not had any water issues that have been reported to us in any of our buildings due to either flooding or the rain. So that has been a blessing for our district, and it just shows that our facilities group, our buildings and grounds, have really gone out of their way to be ahead of a lot of this and make sure that we are not getting roofs that are going to be leaking and foundations that are going to be leaking on us also. So thank you to them. Mr. Chair, that is it.
Thank you, Mr. Benty. Move on to agenda item number 6, the consent agenda. The consent agenda consists of the minutes from the May 20th, 2024 and June 3rd, 2024 work session, employment, additional assignments and other, and authorization of payments, transfers, and investment account. We have a motion for approval of the consent agenda.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. And do we have a second? Thank you, Ms. Boudreau. Was it Ms. Boudreau? Thank you. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes. Agenda item number 7, District Advisory Committee. There is no report. Agenda item 8, the Policy Committee. We have a report, no report, but we have Approval of second reading of policies. Board members, it has been requested that 3 policies be pulled for further discussion. They are policy 530, 525, and 533. So noting that, the remaining policies of 535, 528, 529, 610, 422, and 523. But to do that, I would entertain a motion for approval of those policies.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. And do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Boudreau. Any discussion? Discussion of those policies? Discussion or questions? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes. So next we'll move on, we'll go back to the beginning here of 8A1, Policy 530, immunization, immunization requirements and form. A motion to approve Policy 530, please.
So moved.
Thank you. And do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Robichaud. And discussion. Ms. Moore, I believe you asked for this one to be pulled, so if you would like to,
For the amendment, you mean?
is this
For
one with
this
the amendment?
530, right?
Is this one with amendment?
Yes.
Okay, so yes, you may add your amendment now.
Okay, this is,
So let's do it right. Let's say, I move to amend
I
policy.
move to amend, actually, it's the last sentence of that policy. It's in, I know I wrote it, it's policy 530, and it's the last sentence. I'd like to add something to the last sentence.
Could
the
you
la-
state in your motion what that is, please?
Yes. I would like to amend this. The school district also will forward a copy of all exemption statements received by the school district to the Commissioner of the Department of Health. And I'd like to add onto that with the names of the students and parents/guardians redacted.
So what you are adding,
Yes, is with the names of the students and parents/guardians redacted.
yes, after Department of Health, it's comma.
Yes, comma.
With the names of students and parents and guardians redacted.
Yes.
Redacted. That is your motion to amend Policy 530. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Motion and a second. And discussion.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Wolf.
can I just ask, and I don't know if this is the right time or if you want to address this later, but I thought we had talked about any amendments on these policies would be forwarded to us prior so that we could review them and study them a bit to understand. Once again, if this is the wrong time, just let me know when you want to discuss it. But I thought that's what we were working with and towards. Maybe I misunderstood something. I thought any amendments on policies would be shared with the entire board a day or so before so that we could, like I said, look at them, read them, review them, ask questions. And maybe I'm out in left field on that. If
No.
I am, I apologize.
Mr. Wolf, you are correct. I did receive, that email for that amendment at 10:42 this morning, and I read it around 11:30. And then had a meeting from noon till about 2 o'clock, and I did not forward that to the rest of the board. So maybe it's my error, my apologies, whatever, but
No, and I'm just stating, for me, only me personally, it's hard for me to potentially support an amendment without me knowing much about it, or potentially asking Superintendent Benty about, what are the ramifications if we tweak this or something like that. So just for my sake, it's hard for me to get behind an amendment of a policy, if you will, right here on stage, live.
thank you, Mr. Wolf.
Would agree with Mr.
For the discussion.
Wolf.
Ms. Steves, yep.
Mr. Bunty, does this amendment make any changes?
So this is one that I would have to contact our attorneys around. I looked at some of the state statutes, but like I've said before, I am not an attorney. So sometimes the language in which it's written. So I don't know if if putting that language in would violate some of these statutes or the court case that is attached to it as well. That I don't know. So if the board chooses to go with this amendment, what I would ask is that before you vote to pass it, you just allow me to send it off to the attorneys so I can see if it violates any state statutes or previous court cases.
Mr. Chair.
Dr. Robichaud.
If we could ask Ms. Moore to explain why she's proposing this amendment, what is the significance of it? So we have an understanding of it.
Yes, I guess I'm concerned that the Department of Health wants to know the names of students and parents who refuse to, have their child receive any vaccinations or all vaccinations. That's my problem. I think that's kind of a government overreach, and I'm not sure about HIPAA, what that would be. It probably doesn't have any effect on that. But I think what I'm concerned about is, and especially in California, and I know Governor Newsom and Governor Walz they're aligned with their ideologies. In California, I think they've even put forth that if I know Governor Newsom did, that all students have to be vaccinated. That's a mandate for them, from what I could read here. I had this in this. Yeah, here it is. It said earlier this month, and I think this was in 2023, Governor Gavin Newsom announced that all public and private school students and employees must be vaccinated by July to be on campuses. And also, there was another article that I pulled up on.
Ms. Moore, let's just make sure our discussion and comments are around the amendment.
Well, I'm telling you why I think this amendment should be in place.
All right.
Okay. Advance a bill that would let children as young as 12 years old check into group homes without parental consent. What I am concerned about is that the government at some point may say, well, the parents are not vaccinating their child for whatever reason, so we can come in. And this is a possibility. It's happening in California, and I think, as I said, Governor Walz and Governor Newsom have the same ideology. So I'm concerned about that it's one step closer to eliminating parental rights. And I'm not sure the Minnesota Department, the Commissioner of the Department of Health really needs to know. I think they need to know the numbers, but I don't think they need to know the names of the students or the parents.
Further discussion.
And that's how I feel.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Olson.
of those three policies that you pulled, I would like to table those.
Mr. Olson, right now we're having discussion only on the proposed amendment to the
No,
motion,
okay.
to the motion there. Only the amendment. Any
Yeah,
further
Mr.
discussion?
Mr. Chair, just for more of a context, I know with the vaccines and the parents sometimes have different values and they have different, some want their children to have it, some don't. But I will note that the state of Kansas has sued Pfizer for misleading the people in Kansas on the COVID vaccine. So with all of that context, I am concerned that this may be going farther and, taking away parental rights. And another reason why would the Minnesota Commissioner of Department of Health, why would they need to know the names? They can probably know how many and things like that for their data, but I don't think they need to know the names. I think this is just one protection for parents. And that's my reasoning. Thank you.
Further discussion?
So I guess I agree with Mr. Wolf. Some context prior to the board meeting would be really helpful. In just my prep for today's meeting, this specific policy, I'm looking at the minutes that we just approved. The first reading was approved unanimously. For future, it would be helpful for me if we're adding amendments or making significant changes to policies to bring them up in policy or bring them up at the first reading or, from that information from the board chair so we can do our due diligence. I'll be voting against the amendment piece of that.
Mr. Chair, I just would like to ask, how many days or whatever would you need to,
Well, I would.
maybe ask Mr. Benty that, because he'd have to do some of the legwork.
I think this is a discussion item down the road here,
Okay.
not with this
All right.
particular amendment at this time. So any further discussion on the amendment to the policy? Hearing or seeing none. All in favor of the motion signify by, and remember, you're voting, a yes vote, you're voting for the amendment, a no vote, you're voting against the amendment. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Nay. Motion does not pass. So we're back to our original motion of approval of policy 530, immunization requirements and form. Any further discussion? Further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
Motion passes 4-3.
What is the count? I'd like to ask for a roll call. I don't know who voted.
Chair was able to determine, Jamie, are you able to determine? Oh, no, yes. Motion passes 4-3. Next, we'll move on to 8.
Excuse me. Who did vote, who voted? I don't know.
In the ayes was Mr. Wolf, myself, Ms. Steves, and Dr. Robichaud. The nays were yourself, Ms. Boudreau, and Ms. Moore.
Okay, thank you.
Number 8, 4, policy 528, student parental, family, and marital status non-discrimination. Entertain a motion to approve policy 528.
528, I thought it was 525.
I think it was 5.
It is 525, I circled wrong, I apologize. Motion and so Jamie, I'm going to back up. Did we approve 528? Did I say that correctly?
I hope we approve.
Okay, so we're good. So we pulled 525,
I'd
correct?
like to make a motion to table this.
Okay, we haven't had a motion. Well, okay, so we have
Just made a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. We have a motion to table approval of policy 525. Is there a second? Is there a second to the motion to table policy 525? Last call. The motion fails due to lack of second. Motion to approve policy 525, violence prevention applicable to students and staff. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, Dr. Robichaud. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Discussion. Ms. Moore.
Yes, I just have, I'd like, it would be on page 525, 3. I have a question, I guess, it's under 4I. And I'll read the paragraph and then I have a question. It said, develop cross-cultural awareness programs to unify students of all cultures and backgrounds to develop mutual respect and understanding of shared experiences and values among students and to promote the message of inclusion. I guess I'd like to define what the message of inclusion would entail. It's kind of subjective and it's general, and I'd like to know what that meant, message of inclusion. I guess I'll have to ask the question, does this include inclusion? Does this include displaying or talking about certain beliefs or tenets of a religion, of a creed or a belief system? That's my question on that one. So.
Further discussion? Further discussion on approval of policy 525.
So there's no explanation for my question?
Who do you want to answer that question?
I'd like anyone that knows about it. So does this include displaying or talking about certain beliefs or tenets of a religion, a creed or a belief system. Because right now it's really general, and I'd like to hone it down a little bit before I vote. Maybe I should have brought this up before, a couple days ago. Okay.
I do believe so, yes, because we have a motion to approve policy 525, and we have discussion, so I don't believe now is when we dig down into the weeds, so as far as with an individual board member's question.
Mr. Chair, I'll call the question.
We have a motion to call the question, call the previous question. Is there a second? Is there a second to call the question?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. We have a motion and excuse me, we have a motion and a second to call the question. There is not debatable, and we must have a 2/3 majority, so it must be 5 ayes on this. So all in favor of the motion to call the question signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No,
Okay, motion does pass 5-2. We're back to our original motion of approval of policy 525. Is there any further discussion? Oh, since there's no, there can't be any further discussion,
No.
you've called the question. We will now vote. All in favor of the motion of approving policy 525 signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
no,
Motion passes 5-2. We'll move now to policy, I'm going to get this right this time, 533. Wellness. Motion to approve policy 533, wellness. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Steves. Do we have a second? Chair will second. And discussion. Ms. Morgan.
yes, I had several concerns with this policy. For one thing, why are we eliminating the wording parents? We've taken out parents in this, which I find problematic, and replacing it with caregiver. I'd like to know, do we have a definition of caregiver? You know, is it somebody that, for instance, maybe I could babysit the neighbor kids because the parents are, maybe they're, whatever, had an emergency. And maybe I took the child for maybe 5 days. Would that be considered a caregiver? I don't think we need, in these policies, we need some strict definitions, and I don't think we have them. And another thing, it's that one of the things, and this is one of the minor things too, it says on page 533-6 at the bottom, classroom snacks will not be allowed to be brought by parents. In other words, when birthdays are, now the parents can't bring snacks or anything. I know the teachers aren't happy with this, the kids aren't happy with this. It seems that we're taking out the fun part of sometimes the school activities. So, but the big thing with me is eliminating the word parents, and that seems to be a problem. Because why are we eliminating the word parents and replacing with caregiver? Another thing about it is the purpose of this, and that's on the first page. It says the purpose of this policy is to set forth methods that promote student wellness. What is student wellness? Does this refer to the physical aspects, the mental aspects, dental, psychological, sexual, sexual health, all of these? We really don't have, some of these policies are so, they don't have strict definitions, so they're very subjective. And that's what my problem is with this one. So, thank you.
Further discussion. Ms. Steves.
So, for many personal reasons, I can help define the word caregiver. For example, my parents adopted my niece and nephew. They are not my niece and nephew's parents. They're caregivers. The word caregiver is a legal term for someone who's been adopted. The people that care for our children aren't always parents.
I know
Um,
that.
Hope that makes a little sense. I'd like to touch a little bit on the wellness lines regarding classroom snacks. I don't agree with it either. I don't like it. It takes
Yeah, I
something
agree.
away from, just a little bit of fun. But at the end of the day, I think this is a well thought out, thorough policy. And that's my job, is to approve it, so.
Like I said, caregiver, I think we should have put parent, caregiver, or something like that, but we eliminated parent.
We can agree
And
to disagree on that.
I have, like I said, I have other concerns with this, and I don't think this, I disagree with you on the well thought out of this policy. I don't think it was well thought out. I don't think the definitions are there. So I'll be voting no.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Wolf?
Mr. Benty, can you just talk a little bit about caregivers in terms of all of, Ms. Steves presented a situation where she knows very well, but the school district to release information or anything of that nature, they have legal custody documents and things of that nature. Is that fair to say, or am I incorrect on that?
No, that is correct. We can only release information to people that are designated either as parents or guardians or designated by their parents to receive that information.
So Ms. Moore threw out a scenario where maybe she watched the neighbor kids for 5 days, and could she be classified as a caregiver? In that situation, no, that's not legal in
Yeah.
the way the school district looks at it, correct? I mean, that's all legally
correct.
documented and all that stuff.
Yeah, it would be looked at as who is listed in our student management system as a contact for that student.
Okay, so essentially they're legal guardian of some sort or along those lines, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the clarification.
Or family.
Any further discussion? Last call for discussion. We have a motion and a second to approve policy 533 wellness. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion passes 5-2. Move on to item 9, other committees. Before we move on to finance, again, board members and members of the public, my apologies for labeling the wrong policy above there, so here. Other committees, finance report. So on board book, board members, you have the May 13th Finance Committee minutes, and I reported those at the May board meeting. I have in my hands here the Finance Committee meeting minutes, which are unapproved, obviously, from the June 17th, so just a week ago today here. So I will give you the latest update and ask Ms. Boudreau and Mr. Wolf if they have anything extra to add. In our business items, we approved, the Finance Committee approved the previous meeting minutes. We also approved quite a bevy of contracts, agreements, bids, and grants, as we'll deal with most of those upcoming in our agenda items, such as the property and casualty insurance renewal, the Bruce Smith field lighting replacement, the fiscal year 24-25 Riverbend classrooms, the fiscal year 24-25 state academies for the deaf and blind tuition agreement, the 24-25 Sodexo American LLC contract renewal, the 24-25 vended meal contract, the 24-25 food service joint powers agreement with Surratt Academy, approval of the fiscal year 24-25 food service powers agreement with SevSec. The financial performance, our May student count, the final student count for fiscal year 24 was 3,118 ADMs. Our May investment report was property taxes and state aid drives our increase in cash. In May, we'll see another small decrease in June, yet before our cash will dip off in July and August. The comparative report, we don't accrue as much revenue in the summer months because some of the contracts are only paid during the school year. Overall in May, we are in the black with about $160,000 revenue over expenses. Our May analytics, Mr. Gertis once again reiterated the trend we've seen this year, in which is an increase in state aid and a decrease in federal aid. Also, we have seen an increase in interest revenue. However, this increase is in direct correlation with our bond sales and our financial strategies. We approved the final fiscal year 24-25 budget. We also approved the fiscal year 24-25 adopted budget. And Mr. Gertis shared our 5-year projected projects in order to maintain a 10.75 fund balance. So with that, any questions, or Ms. Boudreau, Mr. Wolf, anything else you'd like to add in report of the Finance Committee?
Nothing here.
Okay. Thank you. Item 10, other matters. 10A, gifts, donations. Our resolution, getting there. Resolution 2425.
2435, I think.
2435, my goodness. So approval of resolution 2425, accepting gifts and donations. Do we have a motion for approval, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr.
Second.
Wolf. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. I will read the resolution here. Adopt the resolution 2435, approving, acceptance of the following gifts, donations. Supply Our Children donated $14,706.21 for school supplies for all. So that is the motion. So discussion on this resolution.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to thank that group for their donation, sizable donation, and wonderful thing. Thank you.
I would totally agree. Any further discussion? Hearing no further discussion, Ms. Steves, this is a roll call, please.
Linda Boudreau?
Aye.
Linda Moore?
Aye.
Richard Olson?
Aye.
Jerry Robichaud?
Aye.
Cassie Steves? Aye. Chad Wolf?
Aye.
John Bellingham?
Aye.
Passes 7-0.
Thank you. 10B, consider approval of applications for dissolution of cooperative sponsorship action. Mr. Gunderson, if you would come forward, please. So getting to this. So let's have, on 10B, let's have a motion for approval of the applications for dissolution of the cooperative sponsorship application. We have a motion, please.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Steves. A second.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Boudreau. And discussion, before we get into too much discussion, Mr. Gunderson, I'll turn it over to you, and you would explain this, please.
Yeah, so there's 4 sports right now, boys and girls soccer that we co-op with BA. We have to dissolve that because we're going to add Shattuck to that. Boys and girls hockey. Boys hockey, we had a co-op with Faribault, BA, and Randolph. Girls hockey, we were in that big South Metro Phoenix. And we're going to try and co-op. We're going to add Medford to that co-op, so.
Very good. So I'll just ask this quick question.
Sure.
So we are not eliminating any sport or activity. We're not excluding any partners currently, but we do this so we can add schools for a co-op, correct?
Correct.
Very
yes.
good. Any other?
Mr. Chair, can I ask Mr. Gunderson
Mr.
a
Wolf.
few questions?
Certainly.
Mr. Gunderson, couple questions here. Boys hockey, for some reason, I thought that we were co-oping hockey with Medford as well.
Yes.
Oh, this is dissolution.
This
I'm
is
sorry,
the
that's not,
dissolution.
okay, so
Yep.
thank you. So I don't know if you want it here or if you want it when we add, but you had made mention that we're going to add Shattuck as a co-op on boys and girls soccer.
Soccer.
Do you want me to ask a question about that ad when we get to the one?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we have a motion for approval of the dissolution of cooperative sponsorship action. Are there any discussion or questions? Okay, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. 10C, consider approval of applications for cooperative sponsorship action. So entertain a motion for approval of the applications presented here on Board Book for cooperative sponsorship.
Moved.
Thank you, Ms. Steves. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Robichaud. And discussion? So, Mr. Gunderson, if you would, or Mr. Wolf, you want to ask your question?
I'll let him go first, and then I'll ask the question. Thank you.
So, 3 sports in the fall, boys soccer, girls soccer, and volleyball. We'll be adding Shattuck to those 3 sports. 4 sports in the winter, boys basketball, girls basketball. We will be adding Shattuck, and then boys hockey, girls hockey. The co-op will be Faribault, BA, Randolph, and Medford for both boys and girls hockey.
Okay. 2 questions. One, do all the new schools, Shattuck and Medford, will they share in the co-op expenses just like BA has? You've got a formula and that'll be passed amongst everybody,
Yep.
is that correct?
Yep,
Okay.
I shared our co-op participant. We break it down into what it costs per participant, and then we share that with the schools.
Okay, thank you. And then just big picture educational piece for me. So Shattuck has these centers of excellence, and they have soccer and they have hockey. It was always my understanding that they could not co-op a sport with us when they have a center of excellence. So in essence, they can't co-op any hockey with us, even for those players that don't make those upper level teams, right? But yet somehow they're able to co-op soccer with us. So educate me on how that works, if you will.
So they have, through the high school league, they have high school teams in both soccer, boys and girls soccer. And what they have is they have their center of excellence that's separate from that, and then they have on campus for their everyday students, 2 high school teams.
For boys and girls
For boys
soccer.
and girls soccer, yes. Hockey is a separate animal. They don't have a high school team that they have, or, they just have a center of excellence. They don't have a high school team registered with the state high school league.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions or discussion? Questions or discussion? Last call. We have a motion for approval of the applications for cooperative sponsorship. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Motion passes 6-1. Move on to, thank you, Mr. Gunderson.
thank you.
Appreciate it. Move on to 10D, the Climate Survey Data Update Report. Ms. Janet Lewis-Muth, come forward, please. Good evening.
Good evening. Okay. So, in the fall, I came and presented to you some information on the culture and climate. And at that point, you asked if we would be doing this again, and would I please come back and share data at the end of the year. So that's why I'm here this evening, is to share with you some data from the end of the year. I want to give just a little bit of context, a reminder that when we do this survey in the fall, we do it with families, we do it with students, and we do it with staff. We do not repeat the survey with families in the spring. Doing family surveying is incredibly time and labor intensive. It requires a lot of phone calling, a lot of translation of materials. It's a significant effort. And we also want to make sure that we're not overburdening our families with too many surveys. That's a lot. So we just do staff and students in the spring. Staff were given time and some treats, actually, to take the survey in their buildings during contracted time. And students were given 5 to 10 minutes in a class period to take the survey. So just so that you have the context of when and how this happened. So we're going to start with the information from staff. And I want to give you, again, a little bit of context. So we had 324 total staff respond this spring. That compares to 307 in the fall. So we had more staff respond in the spring than we did in the fall, which is great. You can see by school the numbers. I don't think we need to go into too much detail. There weren't any huge differences in any of the buildings, except the high school had a significantly higher number of staff responding in the spring. So then the the next piece that I want to just give for you as a reminder, so in the fall, when I presented this information, I ended with this summary about the staff, that staff were feeling tired and disrespected, that some felt that they had quality relationships with colleagues, but others were experiencing this sense of distrust and isolation, and that for staff, student misbehavior or student behavior concerns was the highest concern. Okay, so that's just sort of giving us some context. And so this is a chart that you've seen before. This graph, the style of graph is designed, the green bar is our current data. The gray bar in the background is just to remind you where things were in the fall. The red line, it's an arbitrary line, but we chose it at 80% because that is generally in the multi-tiered systems of support, 80% is that metric that we like to get to feel like it's universally we're reaching, we should be reaching about 80%. So just to give you that bearing. So on this particular slide, we're looking at feelings of safety, feeling like they belong, the sense of trust among staff, and then staff feeling like they have an informal opportunity to influence decisions, which is different than a more formal way of influencing decisions that comes later, and then feeling satisfied for the recognition that they get for doing a good job. Unfortunately, things didn't get better on any one of these, but feeling safe at my school did stay the same. And I think that that's a really important one for us to point out. Safety concerns around the nation are on the rise, and they're not here. That's a really high positive thing for us to see, that we started the school year well above that 80% mark, and we stayed there throughout the year. So even as our staff are expressing some concerns around behaviors in the building, they feel safe. And we should feel really good about that. However, I think it's important for us to note that on some of these other measures, things have gone down. It's also really important to know that it's pretty common for things to go down from fall to spring in a school year, right? Educators get tired as the school year progresses, so you ask them at the end of the year. It's not unusual for them to say that they don't feel quite as positive at the end of the year as they did at the beginning of the year. So we're going to look at another graph in a minute that helps us to compare spring of last year to spring of this year to see how are we doing comparing more apples to apples. But we also do ask our staff for some qualitative information. They get an open text box in the survey where they're allowed to tell us whatever they want. It's a pretty open thing. And so I think it's important for us to see some of these quotes that people are expressing a level of frustration, right? So there are staff members feeling frustrated, people feeling like they don't belong, teachers feeling like they could be supported better. So they're just important qualitative pieces for us to have in mind. And then when we take a look at those same measures that we were looking at before, these charts are showing us the difference between right now, spring of this year, and spring of last year. The gray dots are last year. The colored dots tell us this year. So if it's red, it's an indication that it's gone down. If it's green, it's an indication that it's gone up. So again, that safety one is looking really good, right? The fact that from last year to this year, we are feeling more safe in school is really good. The others are not looking quite so good. They went down throughout the year, and they also went down from spring of last year to the spring of this year. Any questions about these before I move on to the next set? I did these kind of in sets, so you'll look at
A question,
fall, spring.
why don't they feel safe in a school?
But they do feel safe.
What's that?
They do feel safe. Safe is the one that we're
That should
doing
be
well on.
100%. Why?
My guess would be they've watched the news, and so there are a few people who walk into any school and don't feel safe because of what's in the news. But there were no comments to explain feelings of safety. So I take that to be a good sign, that that's not something that was on the top of people's minds that they felt like they needed to tell us about. Yes, Dr. Robish.
Mr. Chair, can you disaggregate that by level?
So each building has received their specific building information. Mm-hmm. I'm not in a position to be able to comment this evening on each individual building's specific data, but the building administrators and Mr. Benti have received that information. And so if a building wants to talk about their specific, but the safety one is pretty across the board, if I recall correctly.
Thank you.
If that was the question you were getting at,
Yes,
yeah.
thank you.
Yep.
Ms. Lewis-Muth, not a question, just a request. Going forward on the gray ones, which are from the fall,
Yes.
is there any way when you do this next year, you would leave the percentages on there for the gray as well, so we can just see from fall to
Yes.
spring in actual numbers? Thank you.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair? Yeah, I do like the way that is laid out, so I hope you keep with that format because it's easy to see, progress or whether we,
Yep.
we need improvements. So I do like that form.
Thank you.
that
The one caution I would give us is that as we move from set to set, when there's only 3 questions on a slide, things are spread out a little bit more. So the spacing between the dots might make it look like it's a bigger gap than it is. So do pay attention to the numbers on the dot ones. Okay, so in this next set, we're looking at feeling informed about policies and procedures, our follow through on new programs, and then a sense of inspiration from our schools. And as you can see, from fall to spring, right, our green went down, the gray is bigger, so that means that we went down from fall to spring. I think the school's inspiring me to do my best. That's not a significant issue that from the fall to the spring, people are feeling a little bit less inspired, right? So I don't think that we should be super concerned about that. However, when we're looking at staff feeling clearly informed about policies and the sense of follow through, those were already well below that 80% line, and we didn't get better. So those are something that we should probably be paying attention to. Some of the comments related to this, really there was a pretty strong trend around communication and folks just feeling like they want more communication. I think that's pretty common, but there's obviously some frustration with the level of communication that was happening. And it's an interesting mix between feeling like it's communication from district level folks to buildings and then also building administration to staff. It was a big mix. It wasn't like it was all one or the other. And then if we look at this one from last spring to this spring, that one has gone down in all 3 of those. But again, those numbers aren't enormous. But it's important for us to acknowledge that things have been trending downwards, not upwards, the last couple of years.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Olson?
Especially when you start a new program, which I don't think we should be starting new programs, are we confusing the staff with all these programs, all these grants, which I don't think that we need to start all these programs? Is that part of it?
I don't know if that's a part of it. It certainly could be. I think I think what is reflected here is follow through, not necessarily the starting of new programs. Right, so the question is specifically once we start a new program, we follow up to make sure it's working. If we don't follow up because we're replacing it with something else new, then I would agree that that's a concern.
But if you don't start a program, you don't have to follow up.
Right, but we do need to have programs to educate our students.
But not every time we get a grant, we grab the money and then, we got to start this. That doesn't make sense to me. Let's get back to the basics and not grab the money no matter where it's coming from. Say yes.
I will allow you to have your opinion.
Thank God I'm at this side of the table.
So I'm going to just ask if we can get through the entire presentation because it's hard for me to follow along.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. I have to request that this comment be addressed. When I hear a board member say to a staff member, and I'm sorry, Mr. Olson, did you just say, thank God I'm on this side of the table? Is that what you just said?
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I don't believe that language or that veiled threat or whatever, I know if I was sitting as a staff member, I know how I would take that. And I do not believe that any board member should ever use that language in public or private to a staff member. That is not our job as board members. That absolutely should never be said. I'm appalled, Mr. Olson, that you said that.
It was not a threat, no. I mean, it was.
Well, what you said, I don't know how else somebody would take it. Thank God I'm on this side of the table.
Well, it just, we're the board.
I'll save it at that, Mr. Chair. That is absolutely unacceptable language.
Let's bring it back, and we all need to revisit in our minds here our code of ethics and why we're here and how we conduct ourselves at meetings. So, Ms. Janet, I'd ask you to continue, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in this next set, we're looking at staff beliefs around staff encouraging students to take advantage of opportunities that exist in the district, emphasizing a respect for all students' different cultural beliefs and practices, staff expecting students to do their best, the programs and resources being adequate to meet student learning needs, discipline being fair, and then administration involving staff in decision-making. So you'll recall earlier we had a more informal opportunities to influence decision. This is a more formal opportunity. So the first three, we are still at that 80% mark, which I think is good. And again, emphasizing showing respect for all students' cultural beliefs and practices. Staff perspective on that is that we're doing better on that one. I think it is important to look at the other three, right? The programs and resources being adequate to meet student learning needs. Only 62% of our staff agree with that. So obviously there's a sense from our staff that we need more resources to be able to do the job that they've been asked to do. There's also a sense that discipline is not fair to at least 40% of our staff. And administration involving staff in decision-making, only 55% agree with that. So I think those are some important pieces. Yes, Dr. Roach.
Mr. Chair, just a comment, and, at the time that the spring survey was taken, we were just going through several $1 million in budget cuts,
Absolutely.
which I think is going to significantly impact the responses that you get from staff. So
Absolutely.
I think that's a variable that needs to be cleared.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. You're correct on that. The timing on this one this was in May.
And I know that
absolutely.
can't be helped, but
Yep.
just,
Yep.
I think we need to be aware of that, so
Yeah.
thank you.
Yep. So one of the things that I think is really important for us to take a look at too, though, is our the mindset of our staff, and I think it's we've got some disconnect happening. So when I reframed a reminder from the fall of where staff were at, they were feeling tired, they were feeling disrespected. Some of these comments really reflect that, and I think it's important for us to acknowledge that. When a staff person in one of our buildings feels like it's not about the quality of the teachers, but it's about the quality of the students, I think we've got a problem, one that we need to address. And I think it's a two-sided problem, right? We have to make sure that our staff have the mindset to work with the students who are in their classrooms every day. And we also have to ensure that our staff feel supported in being able to do their jobs. It's a two-sided piece. But I think this is a really important set of comments that staff are feeling like they're in it against the students, sort of, right, in some sort of conflict with students, as opposed to feeling like they're all in the same boat together. And so I think as a district, we need to find a way to address that. I don't necessarily have an answer for you this evening, but it is certainly something that I think we need to address. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I think these comments reflect the national sense as well. It's not just,
Yes.
this is specific to Faribault, but I think if you extrapolate this is what you're hearing across the states.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Mr. Benke and I had a conversation earlier today, and this is without a doubt not unique to Faribault, and it is still an issue that we have to address here in
Absolutely.
Faribault.
Absolutely.
And so I
We must.
completely agree with you, and I don't think we should turn a blind eye to it just because it's happening
We
everywhere.
can't excuse it because other people are experiencing this.
Right.
Exactly.
Yes, absolutely.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I know this is, you don't know this from the responses, but I'm wondering just wondering out loud here if it's probably tied into discipline issues, because I know some of the discipline issues have been a problem, so I'm just putting forth a comment here.
Sure.
And
Sure. Yep, and I think this quote that's up here now also addresses that, right? That's a specific concern that not adequately addressing behaviors is a part of what's
Yeah.
leading to staff not feeling supported.
Yeah, there we go.
So when we take a look at this, this data this is from spring of last year again to spring of this year, so that sort of 2-year trend. I think it's important for us to see that actually related to, our staff perspective of what we're doing in terms of encouraging students to take advantage and showing respect for all cultures, that has gone up. But we also recognize that we haven't gotten better at expecting the best of students. 80% is good, it's where we want to be, but that one is often in the 90s. And so it's important for us to recognize that maybe our expectations as staff on students has also declined. And I think that's a part of this nationwide trend. And then, again, our sense of having the resources and being involved in decision-making has gone down significantly over the last couple of years. So, okay. It's important to have at least a positive comment, right? This will uplift you. I think this is a fabulous comment, right? A teacher clearly feeling like things are going well where they are. And that their first priority is to put students first, and that they take that very seriously. So I think it's really important. There are teachers who are staff, I should say staff. There are staff who are tired, there are staff who are frustrated, and there are staff who are inspired every day and are working really hard to make sure our students get their best, and we don't want to lose sight of that. This is also another one that was able to talk a little bit about both strengths and some areas to improve. Again, communication gets mentioned here as an area to improve, but feeling inspired to do my best is something that gets mentioned as a strength. So, all right, and then specifically looking at, and this is, I apologize, I left a slide out when I submitted this that looked at the fall to spring comparisons for these 3 questions. So prioritizing students with their social, emotional, and behavioral problems, addressing students' mental health needs, and that people care about me as a person. They're not that different than the other slides you've seen where things went down a bit from fall to spring. So I apologize for not having that included. If people would like to see that slide, I do have it and can share it with anybody who'd like. But this is the 2-year trend. So it is, I think, really important for us to see that from last spring to this spring, staff feel like people care about them as a person. They already were above 80%, and that's gone up. So again, there's a dichotomy between this not a great sense of trust, but also people care about me as a person, right? Being concerned about behavior issues, but feeling safe at school. So there's a lot of nuance to this. It's
Mr.
not
Chair, I'd like to
straightforward.
ask an appropriate question. That lots of mistrust among the staff. Could you explain that? These are professionals, highly trained individuals.
Yep,
Could you
I'm simply reporting that was one of our data points earlier, that number has gone down, that the number of staff who agree with the statement that there is a sense of trust among staff.
But why? I mean, why? They're all certified teachers, highly educated, some got masters.
So that is one of the things that, as I work with, and I'll talk about this at the end of the presentation, but as I work with the principals, then is if it's not directly stated by the people that took this survey the why, then it's on us to go find out the why.
Is this the reason maybe staff are leaving for another district or just getting out of teaching, which is a shame?
Yeah, could be. We don't have a specific answer to that question. So just to summarize now where we're at the end of this year, staff are continuing to feel tired and disrespected, both by students and in some instances by their building and district admin. Many staff are calling for more consistent discipline practices and for social emotional supports. And when we look at over the past 2 years, so last spring and this spring, staff perspectives have declined in 60% of the areas that we measure. So that's just something for us to be paying attention to. So next I want to share a little bit around our student perspectives. You can see that we had 1,295 total students take this. We only survey between grades 3 through 12, and in grades 3, 4, and 5, they answer fewer questions. And the wording has changed a little bit, and their responses are emojis. But then you can see by school how many students responded by each school. Again, not huge differences from the fall. It's about 100, a little less than 100 different over the however many buildings that is, 7 buildings. So not a huge number. Okay, so here's a reminder of where the students were in the fall. They felt like the lack of them treating each other with respect was the number one concern. But their perspectives hadn't changed a ton in the last 3 times that we had done this survey. But we were below that 80% threshold on 11 of the 18 questions. So we felt like we had some work to do as a district. And unfortunately, that hasn't changed a ton. None of the student numbers, I don't believe, have changed dramatically. They're all still sort of hovering around where they were in the fall. And again, I have the same dot points for you to be able to see the comparison from last spring to this spring. There's some changes. I think this one that adults treating students with respect going down is, again, it feels like that's part of the national trend where there's a disconnect, right? Staff don't feel like they're being treated with respect from the students. Students don't feel like they're being treated with respect either. I will say, though, we're still above that 80% measure on this one. So it's gone down, but we're still above that measure that we want to be at. The other thing that I think is important for us to just notice and celebrate a little is the second from the bottom, materials in the school reflect my culture, has gone up. Last spring, we were at 66% of students agreed with that statement. This spring, 74% did. Staff told us that they feel like they're doing a better job of respecting everybody's culture. Students are telling us that at least materially that seems to be showing up. That's good. We still haven't made it to the 80%, but we're making progress, so that's positive. Right? And again, look at the student numbers. I feel safe in my school. It's gotten better, right? So that's a good one for us to notice. All right, a couple of other student perspectives. Again, no major changes from year to year, but, from fall to spring. Teachers understanding my problems is one of our lowest rated ones, but I was talking with a middle school principal today, and she said, and that's teenagers, right? They don't necessarily agree that adults understand their problems. I think there's a piece of that going on here. I also think we might be seeing some of that disconnect, right? Where staff were saying, I just don't understand my students anymore. That's showing up for students as well. So that's something for us to pay attention to and figure out how do we address. So taking a look at those same questions, but measuring this spring compared to last spring, again, things are trending downward. Teachers understand my problems. That's only a 1% change, right? So it did go down, but it's only a 1% change. So again, I think we should be paying attention to it because it's below our 80% mark, but I don't think we should be terrified that it's gone down 1% in the last year, right? All right, and then this is the one where I think we've got some lower scores. We've got this at my school, students have the chance to help decide things. That's relatively low compared to some of the other things we've been looking at on the previous two sets. Positive behavior is rewarded. That's also relatively low, although I think it's important for us to acknowledge we have 3 schools in the coming year that will be participating in the positive behavior interventions and supports cohort training. And another one, a 4th one that will be continuing into their second year of training. Yes. So yes, so there are 4 schools total that will be participating in the PBIS program. And that really does move towards helping staff understand how to reward positive behavior and what does that look like. So hopefully that will make a difference there. I do think we just have to recognize students treating each other with respect is below the 50% mark. It continues to go down. It went down from last spring when we were already saying that's too low. And I would attribute this to some of our social emotional skill building work that needs to continue to happen. I think it's also a growing trend. I think there's a lot in this, and I think we've got to find an answer to it. So in summary on the student piece, students treating each other with respect or lack thereof continues to be their number one concern. Student perspectives have declined in 67% of the areas that we measure over the past 2 years. Those aren't huge declines, but those have declined. But our strongest area of improvement is in having materials that reflect our students. So I will wrap up there, and I'm happy to answer any questions that remain.
Board members.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Wolf.
Mr. Benton, Ms. Lewis-Muth, I want to thank you for doing this. I think it's a wonderful thing to do. I know when I first saw it, I reached out to you and expressed some concerns about it, and the data is what the data is. Whether it's national or not, we can control or try to influence what happens here in Faribault. To Mr. Olson's point, I wouldn't be shocked if some of the staff are leaving due to the way the staff feels, but we'll never know that. But I think, and I don't mean to minimize this, the surveys are the easy part. The hard part is changing the results, and you're not going to change the results without very focused efforts. And, right, we're not going to change the results by doing the same thing over and over. So I applaud you for doing this. I applaud you for looking at the data. I just want to concur. This is the aggregate data. This isn't one particular school, right? You have
Correct.
that. So
Correct.
some could be really doing well in some areas. Some may be struggling, a lot more than others. But I do commend you for doing it. And I look forward to seeing it again in the fall. I'll cross my fingers and, do whatever else I can do to hope that it's better. It's not easy, right? It's not easy. You all have a large task in front of you, and if there's anything that the board can help with, I hope you reach out and let us know.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Dr. Robichaud.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Ms. Booth, if I could ask just a couple of methodology questions.
Sure.
When you sent out the survey, was that sent out randomly to a select group of students or to everybody?
It was to everybody.
All staff and all students?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, so you didn't purposely sample.
We did not.
The other thing is it possible for you to do some kind of an analysis to compare? Because if I take a look at this at the very front, it seems that the students have a better perspective of what's going on in their school buildings than the staff does. So is there a way for you to do an item analysis? Because the questions, I assume, are not exactly the same. But can you do an item analysis so you can compare what the staff feels about their environment, their work environment, and what students think about their learning environment, and see if there's a significant difference, either positive or negative, in that context?
Yeah, for the questions that we have that align, we could do that. I do think it's important to note the response rate is not as high as we'd like it to be in order to do that and to feel.
Well, you can still extrapolate some assumptions from that.
Yep, we would just have to be really careful about the assumptions we were making. But yes,
Thank you.
it's possible. Is that a request or just discussion?
Discussion.
Okay.
Board members. From my chair, for many years in the classroom, one of the most difficult things to do is to do a self-evaluation or ask other people, how are you doing? For 36 years at the end of the year, I asked every one of my classes, tell us what was good, tell me what was good, tell me what I need to improve upon, interaction with kids, with other students, etc. And as Mr. Wolf pointed out, the difficult part is once you get that data, is how do you move the needle? People need to change. How do you going to, are you understanding the data? Are you, and when I taught in the secondary, it varied from hour to hour. First hour was much different than seventh hour because morning kids, afternoon, right after lunch, whatever, right? So I know this happens in the private industry as well when you do an analysis of what's going well, what isn't going well. Let's talk about our workers, et cetera. It's difficult and it's hard to hear and hard to read and see sometimes the results of what people are saying and what they're going to do. But again, it needs to be reacted upon. But still, at the same time, with this data, we need to still show how we are going to provide a quality education for all of our learners, PK-12 and beyond. So that's, what do we do with this and how do we adjust this? And these things are difficult. So I thank you, you and Mr. Venti and the staff for doing this. It's a difficult thing and to analyze the data. So thank you very much, and we'll continue.
Mr. Chair, if I may, and I apologize if you did given me this figure and I didn't hear it, but what were the response rates for in general? You can remember the response rates for the staff and response rates for the students.
Yeah,
Just in general, if you haven't.
Right. So we have raw numbers, but calculating rates requires that we know what the denominator is. And that's a hard one to pinpoint on a given day, right? So we wouldn't want to count a student who is absent in the denominator on the day that we did the survey, for example. So
Just in general?
we're in the 40% range for secondary students. We were closer. You know what, I did not look at our numbers. Our numbers for the 3rd through 5th grade were in line with where they've been in the past, so above 70% for response rates. For staff, it's a little bit harder to tell because some are counted more than once because they work in multiple buildings. So for example, I'm just going to call it a school psychologist has 2 buildings of responsibility. They would have checked both buildings, and so it's a little bit hard to know. It's a little bit harder to know. And some buildings made it available to primarily licensed staff. Other buildings said all staff in the building. And so again, it makes it harder to calculate.
So, Mr. Chair, I figured I would give an update on what, kind of talking about what Mr. Olson brought up as well as what you brought up, and echoing some of the things that Dr. Robichaud spoke about as well. We fully expect, and Janet and I talk about this all the time, that our spring data will not look like our fall data simply because of the time that it is given throughout the year. And then couple on top of that over $2.9 million in budget reductions. Those are not excuses. Those are just things to factor into some of that. So the way this works is, and to echo what Mr. Wolf said as well, is that this was a combination of all buildings together. So what you saw was a district-wide picture. I have gone through and will continue to go through the individual building numbers, which depending on the building will look very different than the numbers you've seen here. We have some buildings that are doing very well. So I invite the board, if you would like to sit down and go through and see the individual building percentages and responses, I can sit down and go through those with you so that you can see the work that we're doing in some of the buildings, and we can talk about that and how that's paying off in the student and the staff surveys. Along with that, every time we do this, I know Janet walks through with the administrators their results, and then I sit down and go through them with them as well, as asking a lot of the questions that the board asks. Why do we think this is happening? What are we going to do to combat this? Or what are we going to do to get out in front of this? Or what are we going to do to change this perception type thing? So we take these results very seriously, and we spend a lot of time talking about them. So that is how we use these results.
Thank you. Any further questions or discussion, board members? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. So now we move on to agenda item number 10E. Mr. Gertis, I see, if I count right, you're on the next 14 agenda items. So you might as well come up and make it. And while he is getting set up, I think this would be a very good time. I'm going to issue a 10-minute recess. So for that, so as of right now, 10 minutes at 6:53, so in 10 minutes we will re-adjourn. So I am issuing a recess. I now call the meeting back to order. We are on agenda item 10E, consider approval of fiscal year 24-25 property and casualty insurance renewal. I'll entertain a motion for approval.
So, second.
Thank you, Dr. Robichaud, second by Mr. Wolf. To begin the discussion, I'll turn it over to Mr. Gertis.
Thank you, John. So before we start, I want to introduce the guest that probably most of you know, sitting to my immediate left, Grant Wilson with Hartman Insurance. He's been our broker for as long as I've been around the district, and I believe this is, at least in my tenure, this is the first time he has come to join us at a board meeting. He was on the Finance Committee meeting again last week as well. But just to set a little bit of the stage, and then I'm going to let Grant chime in more at a global level as well. Last month, we had the work comp policy that we approved, and we had a savings there of about $17,000, which was a positive, right, for the general fund. Tonight, we come with you with a renewal for our property and casualty insurance with not quite so bright of a news to share with you, but yet news that could be much worse. So, as many of you are aware, right, property insurance is going up, both at commercial level, industrial level, residential level. I know mine has gone up 20+% as well in my house. Rates of inflation are going up, number of hailstorms is going up. Obviously, around here lately, the amount of flooding is going up in southern Minnesota here. So when we got a renewal back from Selective Insurance for fiscal year 25, there was about a 35% increase on our property rates alone. And they came back with a wind hail deductible on our large buildings of $1 million, which means that any significant event, we'd be on the hook for the first $1 million. One of the other buildings, I don't remember which, was $500,000 and then $250,000 from there. Which is a big change, right, from where we were last year with minor increases, minor deductible increases. As I've been going to a few conferences, MASBO conferences, it's kind of everything it's what everybody is talking about is that you're lucky if you get $1 million. Some carriers across country are charging 1 or 2%. Which in our case would be a lot more than $1 million when you talk about the high school and middle school. And we're talking about property increases in 40, 50. And Grant will share a few more stories in a little bit. So long story short, Grant worked pretty hard with our carrier, Selective Insurance. We were able to reduce those $1 million down to $250,000, which again is still a big increase from the $25,000 it was before. On our two biggest buildings, and then down from there at $100,000 on the elementary schools in McKinley and AOC, so on and so forth. We made a small change in our out-of-pocket deductible, went from $10,000 to $25,000, but that all reduced our overall spend by a little over $8,000, in addition to the lower deductibles on wind and hail on our roofs. That being said, we are bringing to you this morning, or this afternoon, or this evening, whatever it is, a $63,000 increase for a total spend on property casualty of $276,977 for fiscal year 25. So I'm going to pause for a little bit, turn it over to Grant. He's got a few other things he'd like to share with you guys tonight as well from his perspective, looking big picture and across multiple sets of insurance business.
Scott stole a little bit of my thunder there. I think all of you guys, I hope everybody has, not that I hope that you've seen this, but I think everybody is hopefully aware of the state of the property situation in the state. If you haven't seen it on your businesses or your homeowner's policy, you certainly will. The change in deductible structure is dramatic, and the pricing situation is changing substantially. It's not anything that makes anybody on our end of things very happy. This is pretty awful. Within the school district market, and I don't know, Scott, if you wanted to share anything about any of the other districts and some of the conferences that you had, but I can share with you that there are a number of districts that are facing substantial challenges with even having all of their buildings insured. Besides the price increases, besides the deductible increases, you do have a pullback in the market of the carriers offering coverage. And if you have that, the dynamics of your insurance program change quite dramatically. Either trying to choose whether or not you insure a building, or if you do decide that that is a imperative, the pricing structure on those buildings that are not being offered renewal on it's incredible, to be honest. It puts the districts in a very bad place. Fortunately, we have a reasonable renewal. We have a renewal that is still probably 2/3 on the rate on the property of two of the more major carriers in the state, and is still significantly less than another program in the state. And it's a testament to our longevity with Selective and the fact that our district has been, for the most part, relatively claims-free.
So, Grant is correct. At the municipal conference in early May, there was a lot of districts that are seeing very large increases, both in the Big Nine and obviously other districts across the state. So that is a reality. But the Grant did share. The other thing I'd point out that I almost forgot, and you were supposed to remind me, but of that $63,000, roughly $13,000 of that is just an annual inflation increase on our policy. So every year our policy goes up by an inflationary amount. Obviously, the last couple of years, inflation has been higher than normal. So roughly that $50,000, a little over $50,000 increase is kind of the net of the insurance increase for fiscal year 25.
That's correct.
So, any questions or Richard?
What if we raise our deductible? I mean, you play the deductible game, you raise that, your rates go down. Is that true?
And we did, and that was, we took our all other perils, which is a new term for all of us, because it used to mean everything. We used to just have one deductible. But now we have the all other perils, and then we have the wind hail. And the wind hail has come up, as we have discussed, and we took the all other perils deductible up this year, and it helped us offset some of the premium, which was being used to kind of try to negotiate it to get the wind hail deductible down some. So we did play that game, and if we go a whole lot higher, you just run into diminishing returns. And moving to the all other perils deductible that we moved to, we saved about $8,000. If we were to add on another $25,000, we'd probably save like $4,000. You just run, the higher you go on that, sooner or later, it just becomes like catastrophic health insurance, right? Where the carrier is still on the hook for the vast majority of the claim anyway, so the amount of deductible that you take on just yields lower results.
Maybe it is get down to a catastrophe, like a whole building burns down, which is not possible with sprinklers unless they're not operational. But again, can you raise the deductible where everything is neutral?
We cannot raise the deductible high enough right now to be able to make it neutral in the environment that we're in.
Okay. And do you think, Scott, do you think we get any help from the state next session for something like this?
You know, while I'm not a crystal ball reader, I would say it's a good a chance if it's not raining in the next 2 days. I mean, that's my honest answer. I think right now the state has got so many more things that next legislation session they're going to be, school districts are going to be going at them for, from the unemployment insurance to the paid FMLA and all the other things that are just keep going up and up and up, that this is not going to even be on their radar.
Further discussion, board members, questions?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Wolf.
Can I just confirm, Grant, as stated in the document, it does state that the wind and hail deductible is 250,000, and the other peril deductible, you did increase from 10,000 to 25,000,
Correct.
correct? Thank you.
Further discussion?
With the offset that, we do have LTFM funds, right? That for the most part can kind of self-insure us against that extra added $15,000.
In any single claim, we took on that $15,000 in responsibility and we saved $8,000. That's a good return. It's when you take the next jump, to Richard's point, if we would go 25 to 50, for example, it'll save us dramatically less than that.
Oh.
It just doesn't. We'll do anything we want. We'll get you guys numbers. Anything that the board directs, we most certainly will do it. It becomes less advantageous.
Is the trend in the nation, I've read that insurance companies are pulling out of certain states?
Yeah.
And that's it. We're done. I don't know if it's with commercial too, or probably, for whatever reason, they said, we're not, too many claims, we're gonna pull out of your state. Is there any danger in Minnesota of, maybe we had 10 insurance companies, now we're down to 2.
Oh, we absolutely have that going on. I mean, they are, while they may or may not be they may not be pulling out wholesale yet. You definitely have restrictions in them offering coverage. They'll put a moratorium on new business because they will feel like either they can't get the rate or they can't get the deductible structure that they want because they can't get it passed through the state in a time that's desirable to them. So while we may not have an exodus like you read about out of Florida or California, we absolutely have some pretty severe underwriting restrictions going on right now in Minnesota, and it is constricting the market. There's no doubt about it.
Like we did with, I think Chad brought it up years ago, and we started self-insurance. Is that a possibility with big 9 districts? Like, why don't we do that like we did with health insurance? What's the concept of self-insurance?
The concept can be, we could absolutely take a look at structuring programs on that. It's typically, the self-insurance piece doesn't exist terribly well within the property side of the market. The self-insurance works well within the liability side of the market. Our liability costs are relatively small with a school district. The property is the driver. And so it's very difficult to devise like a self-insured fund or a captive that is sitting within the property market. There's not very much out there that functions. I think you may see some of that try to evolve given the current status of the market and countrywide, but it doesn't exist at this time terribly well.
Any further discussion? Last call. We have a motion to approve the fiscal year 24-25 property and casualty insurance renewal. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Yes, sir.
Agenda item 10F, consider approval of Bruce Smith Field lighting replacement. I'll entertain a motion for approval of Bruce Smith Field Stadium lighting replacement.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Boudreau. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. Discussion. Board members, I just wish to point out that in each of these items, all in your preparation for the meeting, the documentation and things presented to us is all here done very, very well. Gives the details, et cetera, here. So in lieu of that, now, Mr. Gertis, I'll just ask you to explain, since I did that, saying it's all in writing there, just briefly explain that to the board, please.
I'll try and summarize this in a couple sentences. So it was in late May when it was determined that one of the light poles, one out of the 6 light poles at Bruce Smith Field, all the fixtures on that light pole, 10 in total, were shot. What we think was caused, can't prove it, was caused by a lightning strike, but that's what we believe caused the issue. The bulbs on those, or the fixtures on those poles are in excess of 40 years old. The metal halide lamps that are included in those fixtures are becoming hard to come by. So in analyzing that and looking at the cost to just the one light pole and bring everything back to its antiquated self, and comparing what it would cost to upgrade those lights. And then also, for those of you that have not heard, in the state statute at the 11th hour, the state legislature said in Minnesota that effective 1/1 of 25, you can no longer buy metal halide or mercury vapor lamps anymore. Screw-in fluorescents or plug-in fluorescents are becoming obsolete. We are bringing forward you tonight a recommendation to replace all 6 poles with 70 light fixtures, 70 existing light fixtures total, to brand new stadium LED lighting, so that we have all of the same color and a relatively large increase in foot candles across the average across the field. The budget numbers in here, at the time this was printed, was between $190,000 and $220,000. Question that was asked at finance, if it was higher than that, if we bring it back to the board, I can tell you that as I sit here tonight, the number will be less than $190,000. So, based on a couple of the data points that I have already in my possession.
Mr. Gertis, can you turn the mic towards you? The closed caption is having a hard time picking up what you're saying.
Thank you, Mr. Benti. First time anybody's accused me of that before. So we also do get a $15,000 rebate from Excel, upfront rebate from Excel of approximately $150,000. The other thing that will be nice is currently today we have roughly 35 foot candles on the field, average across the field. The new lighting standard will bring that up to 50. So while 15 foot candles might not seem like a whole lot, it is a big number. So you will see a vast difference in the lighting of that field. So we are bringing this request to you tonight. The other thing just to keep in mind is that August 26th, which is less than 2 months or just over 2 months away, is our first soccer game. So it's kind of imperative that we keep this project moving so that we can have this work done on or before the first soccer match. I think it was August 26th.
Further discussion?
Mr. Chair, this basically a football field, soccer field, but shouldn't we be spending our money on the buildings and stuff where kids are learning? To me, this is a luxury. Do we need that money for our buildings rather than a football or soccer field? Can we arrange schedules so, they can play more? And I don't know, but where we're putting our money, I think should be really towards the buildings.
Chair.
Dr. Robichaud.
Bruce Smith Field is part of our facilities. How many students participate in activities in that field? So to say it's not part of our facilities is incorrect, Mr. Olson. It is part of our facilities.
It is, but it's not where the kids are learning.
Yes, they are learning there. Sorry to disagree with you.
We would be the only Big 9 school to not be able to play a football game or a soccer game at night. So that would be the decision that would have to be made, and I don't really believe that is feasible based on officiating schedules, parents' work schedules, kids' schooling schedules, and the added expense that this would bring.
Mr. Gertis, I think you can add boys and girls track in there as well, because those track meets go very late into the evening.
Thank you, Chad. Forgot all about that.
And also, let's not forget, we do lease out Bruce Smith Field to other schools within the community as well.
Forgot about that too.
With that, so yes. Further discussion?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Wolf.
So Mr. Gertis, not blaming the state here, but essentially this turns into a unfunded state mandate come January 1 of 2025, unless everybody's happy with a hodgepodge of all different colored light bulbs, if you can't buy replacements for what's there. Is that fair to say?
That would be fair to say, even though the legislation is only in the state of Minnesota. So nothing says we can't drive over to Wisconsin and get a couple, or hop down to Iowa, find a few, or go online to Amazon and probably pull a few out of Amazon. I would say this is not federal legislation, this is state legislation. So I don't know how they're going to enforce it in the first place, but Chad, you are correct. Fixing one light pole, just jump in here, fixing one light pole with LED and leaving the other 5 with metal halide was not an option for multiple reasons. But the big one is the color of the light. The CRI, color rendering index of the light, is completely different, and so it's got to be all or nothing.
Thank you.
Have you had bids yet or not? Not yet.
I have received one quote as we sit here today, so that's why I can tell you it's less than $190,000.
Discussion.
And Mr. Olson, it would be just quotes, it's not bids.
Last call for discussion. We do have a motion to approve Bruce Smith Field Stadium lighting replacement. Hearing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. 10G, consider approval of fiscal year 24-25 Riverbend Traditional Classrooms and Field Trips Agreement. Entertain a motion for approval.
So moved. Second.
Thank you, Dr. Robichaux. Thank you, Mr. Wolf, for the second. Discussion. Again, I think it's laid out very well in the board book here. Information, what they offer their kids. I will say we are truly fortunate to have Riverbend Nature Center in this town and the programming they supply and enrich our science and overall curriculum and opportunities for kids in this district. I know there are other communities that do come to Riverbend Nature Center to enjoy their program, so we are truly fortunate to have that, so fully support this. Further discussion? Discussion, hearing none, all in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. 10H, consider approval of fiscal year 24-25 Minnesota State Academies for the Deaf and Blind tuition agreement. Entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Steves. Discussion. Mr. Gudis, anything you want to add?
Oh, okay, yeah.
I didn't let you in on the last one, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. This is a annual contract renewal with the state academies. This allows us to receive ADM for any student or students that find their way over to Faribault schools to do credits over here, both in person and online.
That's what I was going to ask. Thank you. Further discussion? Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. 10I, consider approval of fiscal year 24-25 Sodexo America LLC contract renewal. Motion for approval, please.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Boudreau. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Discussion. Mr. Gertis.
So what you have in front of you is a couple pages of the contract that lists all of our meal services by type with the current 24 fee, the percent increase or decrease in any respective meal service item, and then the fiscal year 25 new rate. This will be the third year of a 5-year RFP that we did a couple years ago. So we'd have a couple more years to go if we choose to execute on those. But you can see that some of the prices are going up and some of the prices are going down. And the reason for that is last year when we negotiated the prices in a very high inflationary rate, we always do that before we know what the rates actually are. So the fiscal year 25 rates are going to be let sometime mid-August. So we really don't know what those rates are. So our breakfast rate was getting a little bit too close to the reimbursement rate. Therefore, we took a decrease there. We have some room on the lunch and à la carte programs. Same with the milk, we took a decrease on the milk. And then same with some of the other ones there. We have some small increases on our SFSP and snack programs with a little bit bigger increase on the CACFP program.
Excellent. Questions or discussion? Questions or discussion? Questions or discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. 10J, consider approval of fiscal year 24-25 vended meal contract for Cannon River STEM School. Motion for approval.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Steves.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Boudreau. Discussion.
Yeah, just a few things here. So with the vended meal contracts, so to specify, we'll have a few different ones here. A vended meal contract really basically means that we are supplying the meal and the condiments and supplies to a school district, along with the transportation and the administrative costs to do all that work. The site, in this case, the STEM school, remains in charge of all administrative responsibility, claiming responsibility, monitoring, and any audits that might happen. We do offer, obviously, audit support in the areas that we do need to offer that support in around the food and the different areas there. So this is the first one of 4 that I'm bringing forward to you tonight for the STEM school.
Questions or discussion? Ms.
Mr.
Moore.
Chair? Yes, Mr. Gertis, I went through these in haste, and I may have missed something, but is milk offered for all of them? It didn't look like for the STEM school, or was it? Is milk offered for all of the contracts here?
So, Ms. Moore, you are correct. The STEM
'Cause I
school's
noticed
option
this-
is without milk.
Okay.
They buy their milk directly through
Oh,
KEMS
all right.
because
So
of
they have-
a.
The students have access.
Yes, the eligible meal does need to include milk.
Yeah,
STEM school buys their milk from KEMS directly because they have a cooler rental agreement for milk coolers with KEMS directly, and so they buy their milk from
because
them.
I was concerned that the students weren't being offered
No,
milk.
no. And-
Does this
and-
include meals for adults too then? Adults, and some of them I see with adults.
We
and-
usually, in these, don't serve any adults with the
Okay,
vended
but what about
meals.
the rest of the contracts, or should I just, do they usually have the adults in them?
For the STEM school, I know we don't serve any adults there.
Okay.
The Head Start, we don't serve any adults. Little Scholars is a daycare, so there's no adults
Okay.
that eat there. And Surratt Academy, no adults eat
Okay.
there as well.
All right, thank you for your
Or
clarification,
just
especially on the
sorry.
milk.
Yeah.
Okay.
Further discussion? Questions or discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. 10K, consider approval of fiscal year 24-25 vended meal contract for Head Start. Motion for approval.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Boudreau.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Steves, for the second. Discussion.
Verse 2 of the same song,
Okay.
with milk.
Okay. Discussion? Questions, discussion, questions? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. 10L, consider approval of fiscal year 24-25 vended meal contract for Little Scholars Daycare. Motion for approval, please.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Steves. I'll second. And discussion. Same song
Verse
number
3.
3. Discussion? Discussion, anyone? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. 10M, consider approval of fiscal year 24-25 vended meal contract for Discovery Public School. Motion for approval.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Boudreau. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Steves. Discussion. Once again, same for number 4.
Verse 4.
Okay. Questions or discussion? Discussion, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. 10N, consider approval of fiscal year 24-25 food service joint powers agreement, Surratt Academy. Motion for approval, please. Also move. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Boudreau. Discussion.
So we have a different song now. So Surratt Academy and the SEVSEC are what's called a joint powers agreement. What that means is that we have full administrative authority over their food program. We supply the meals, we do all the billing for the meals, we do site monitoring for the meals. We are responsible for any audits that would happen at those sites and have fiscal responsibility for those audits, as well as we make the profit on all the reimbursable meals that are served there between the reimbursement rate and our costs.
Questions or discussion?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Olson?
yeah, the academy, are there counts down from when school started? Do you know anything about the population there? Is it less meals, more meals, same meals?
So when we started serving at Surratt in September of 23, they were right at that 65 to 70 mark. We ended the year with serving about 52 meals there on average. Now, that doesn't take into account the few kids that obviously bring their own, right? That's just meal counts and what we serve. Their administrative count there at the end of the year was 55 when school ended this year, fiscal year 24.
Okay, thank you.
Further discussion? Discussion or questions? Hearing none. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. 10O, consider approval of fiscal year 24-25 food service joint powers agreement, SEVSEC. Entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. Discussion.
So again, this is a joint powers contract, everything being the same as before. This is also a long-standing contract that we've had with SEVSEC. So just as a side note.
Very good, thank you. Questions or discussion? Questions or discussion? Discussion, hearing none. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. 10P, consider approval of fiscal year 2024 final budget. Mr. Gertis.
So this is the same budget that was presented at the work session a couple, 2-3 weeks ago now, or whatever it's been. Nothing has changed in terms of those budget numbers. I will entertain any questions that you guys might have. That was not my intent to review the whole thing, but you all know I love to talk, so I would gladly do that if you so choose to do that.
Board members, do we have any questions on the fiscal year 2024 final budget? Fiscal year 20. Did we have a motion? No. I'll entertain a motion for approval of the fiscal year 2024 final budget.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Robichaud. Any further discussion?
Mr. Gertis, thank you for presenting it a couple weeks ago.
Yes,
Thank you, Chair.
the work session. Discussion?
Mr. Chair, I just want to thank Mr. Gertis for all his hard work and for answering questions. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Last call for discussion. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion passes 6-1. 10Q, consider approval of the fiscal year 24-25 adopted budget. I'll entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. I will second. And here we have Mr. Gertis and Mr. Martindale, our controller. So, welcome.
So, before we begin, I just want to thank Brett for being here tonight. He made the long trek from southern Iowa, wherever he calls home. So, so he's going to join me tonight for this presentation. I'll start out before we get going here to say, Brett and the rest of the team were an integral part of putting this together. We started this endeavor very first week of April and finished it up not more than a couple weeks ago. So it's kind of a long process. But so what we're going to present to you tonight is the fiscal year 24-25 adopted budget. And just way to go. So a couple things we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about the state of the state. We're going to talk about what's new in fiscal year 2025, and very similar to 2024. There's a lot of new things that we're going to be talking about tonight. We're going to look at general fund revenue and expenses as a comparison of total, and show you some charts and graphs there. We're going to look at some multi-year 23, 24, and 25 data to kind of give you a trend of kind of where things are moving. We're going to talk about our other two primary funds, our food service fund and our community education fund. And then we'll touch base briefly on all the other funds as well, and wrap up with some summary slides and some questions. So what's new in the state of the state? So for fiscal year 25, we get 2% on the funding formula. That was in the legislation that was passed in 2023. What you can see here is that number amounts to, based on the budgetary numbers, of $309,000 plus. Keep in mind, I hear this from a lot of people, get a lot of questions from the constituents here in Faribault, that they think we get 2% on total expenses, which would be in the neighborhood of $1.2 million. That is not the case. We get 2% on a funding formula. That funding formula is about $240,000 for each percent that we get. That would be about $487,000. That is assuming that we maintain our student level. And as we're all well aware, our student level projections, which we'll see here shortly, are going from 3,118 in the final budget for 2024 down to 3,095. Estimated for fiscal year 25. We have a new categorical aid, and this is kind of based on a new definition of North American Indians, but we're expected to get about $42,500 in North American Indian aid. Just for the record, North American Indians does not include Mexico, so don't ever let anybody tell you that. That was a real curveball for my staff. So again, this is a restricted categorical aid in fiscal year 24. So in this last legislative session, they did make this a reserved account and allowed us to carry the money over. For us, it won't be applicable in 24, but it could be applicable in fiscal year 25. Also note that we can only carry it over for the first 6 months of the following year, so we have to somehow figure out how to keep track of that in our system. A couple new categorical aids for the READ Act. The one that is in this budget is categorical aid that was passed in the fiscal year 24 of $111,347. Again, new categorical aid with a new fund balance that was enacted in fiscal year 24 legislative session. This particular bucket of money is dedicated for training staff in our READ Act curriculum. What's new, about a month ago, you heard Mr. Daner do a pretty in-depth presentation on EL. Our EL revenue for fiscal year 25 is projected to be $1.248 million. That number is going to be relevant in fiscal year 27 when they give us a little bit of a cross-subsidy on our EL revenue, and more to come on that in future meetings. One thing that is new this year that has never been this way, at least in the last 15 years that I can find records to, is that the Area Learning Center is projected to have a fund balance at the end of '25. For those of you that remember, we projected that again at the end of '24, but the estimated projected fund balance for the Area Learning Center, $378,000 plus. Remember, this is primarily due to the ALC having a big increase in compensatory revenue that by state statute is all theirs. They don't share their compensatory revenue across the district. It's categorical, and they get to keep their entire compensatory revenue. Heard me mention earlier, ADM assumption, 3,095. Not really much new on the expenditure side to talk about. We talk about the EL cross subsidy. That is kind of a growing number of $1.67 million. That does include the 2 teachers that the board approved. I believe it was at the May board meeting, the addition of 2 more teachers in that area. And when this budget was completed, the LTFM budget was set to be in positive territory of $153,000. I put for now because that usually changes, and the board just approved a lighting project which will substantially reduce that fund balance for fiscal year '25. Again, the same proverbial slide, slid over a little bit more for the '25 adopted number, just to, again, to put this in picture form. Again, the black line on there, trend line. Obviously, that trend line is going in the wrong direction. But again, that's just based on historical data points. So hopefully we'll break that trend and move it a little bit less of an angle. So I'm not
Scott,
gonna...
excuse me, I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Richard.
So when you got that straight line, I know you can't predict more than, 2-3 years ahead, but if you follow that line, let's say 10 years, which is, if you just follow that, what would our population be? I mean, would that, it's downward. Pretty soon it'll go to 0, but it won't be.
So Richard, there's 2 lines on here. There's the black line, which I think you're referring to. Again, that's the trend line. So that trend line is really based on what we have here. It looks like to be about 10 years worth of data. And so each one of those years, the last 10 years, we've seen a decrease in enrollment. And so that trend line is going to keep continuing to go south. And that 10 years, I don't know what that would be, but eventually it'll go to 0, right? We'll all be long gone, but eventually that line will go to 0 or right above 0, right, if this continues. The green line on there is based on enrollment projections that we presented to the board back in February, I think. All right, and that trend line, or that line, bottoms out somewhere at 10 years at about 2,900, to answer your question. So, again...
So it's going to go down and maybe just level off.
Flatten off. And if you look at this green line here, it's kind of at the tail end of that. I don't have a little pointer thing there where it says 2951. You can kind of see that green line starting to just slowly flatten out. And if we had room on the chart and we ran that out for another 10 years, you would see that continue on. This again is the final numbers for fiscal year '24. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I am going to point out that what we have here on the top, I guess you can't see that, so I don't know why I'm doing it, is that we have a starting fund balance at the beginning of '24 of 11.18%, projected ending fund balance of 11.31%, or about 0.13% increase way in the upper right, with an estimated increase to the fund balance, the unrestricted fund balance, the 422 of $565,000. Okay. Again, we're just going to kind of skip down, but here we are going to talk a little bit more on the adopted sheet for fiscal year '25. So we see here our beginning balance carried forward from fiscal year '24 at 11.31%, ending fund balance of 10.92%, all right, with a decrease in fund balance of 0.39%, or about $429,000. Now, I want to go back up and just point out one thing here. So here we had an increase of 0.13%, and it was over $500,000. Here we have a decrease of 0.4%, but it's less than $500,000. So remember that the denominator in here drives your percentage. And because we have no federal revenue, we have no we have budget cuts, that all messes with the numbers here at the bottom. Okay, so just keep that in mind. If we look down, you can kind of see in the bolded, it's very hard to see on that screen. We have there the 6 new categorical aids in fiscal year 24, with 2 new that we know about today, categorical aids for fiscal year 25. The 320, which is the finance code for the American Indian Aid, which now has a fund balance of 420, and the READ Act, which is not put out yet, so we don't have a code for that. And you'll see those are all incorporated into the list of categorical aids that you see there. You will notice here on the under the ALC, there's that $378,000 there in their projected fund balance. Again, we talked about that. That directly comes out of the unrestricted fund balance because we have to restrict it for use at the ALC. Okay?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Wolf.
Mr. Gertis, when you say for use, is that only on staffing and programming, or can that be building as well? What are the parameters?
It can be building as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So we're going to move down here again, talk a little bit about food service on the next page. Yep, thank you, Brett. Next page, food service is, again, pretty much a break even. Budgeted coming out of the gate. I do want to just remind the board, I've mentioned this a couple of times, that the legislature said we can now buy tables, and we are going to be looking at replacing tables, at least at our elementary schools and maybe at McKinley as well. So there's about $155,000, $160,000 budgeted for that project that will be coming off the ground here as soon as we can get to it. We look at the community ed program, Fund 4, again, basically a break even there. One thing I do want to point out, and you'll see this later in some of the slides, the fund balance doesn't change, right? It's hovering right around that $900,000 from beginning to end of the year. One thing to note is the large increase in the revenue and expenses there. That is due to all the hard work and increased programming that the community ed program is doing in their area. We look at Fund 6. So Fund 6 has got a pretty large starting fund balance. You can see that expenses way outpace revenue in that line. Keep in mind that, again, we recorded all the revenue in Fund 6 in fiscal year 24, and we were going to keep expending all that money off through fiscal year 25, fiscal year 26, until, and maybe fiscal year 27, when all of those projects get completed that we have on the books. Again, debt service, not a big change there, not a big change in our internal service fund, our health insurance fund, again, a little bit there. And our irrevocable trust fund, we did, as per the board policy, budget revenue and expenses there. We also did budget to take the implicit rate for fiscal year 25. Now, that'll be a end of year decision whether we do that or not, but it is in the adopted budget for fiscal year 25. Next page we have here, this is a little bit harder to read, but again, this is just really a summary, and I'm not going to go through all of these numbers. You can look at the general fund there, losing $275,000. Keep in mind that is both restricted and unrestricted, okay? Restricted, we pick up a little bit of money with all the categorical aids. Unrestricted, we're losing a little bit. Net, we lose $275,000. Again, food service, community ed, we talked about all of those bottom line numbers, but there you can see how it's kind of broken down by program type, which is what the expenditures are listed there between administrative, direct support, regular instruction, vocational, special ed, and so on and so forth down the line. Then on top, you also see the revenue broke down by source. And we'll see some more slides about that later. So this is something that I added, this year is kind of the unique thing of the fiscal year 25 budget. This is talking about days cash on hand. So at every board meeting, Brett works through and does an investment report that we share at the finance committee meeting, and John briefly mentions it's here at the board meetings, and you guys approve that. Here we're talking about days cash on hand, and for those of you that aren't following what I'm saying here, if everything shut down and we didn't receive another dime, at the end of the year, because that's what these are based on, we could pay our bills for 51 days in fiscal year 24. We could pay our bills 51 days, and then from there it kind of trickles down from there. So it's just a different way of looking at our investment report and how far our money would last, assuming the state or the federal government, or God forbid, and or both dry up, right, for a period of time because of arguing or whatever else they do. This graph in front of you shows the volatility in our cash. So this is a snapshot from July 1st, 2023 to roughly July 1st of 2024. What you see here is kind of the same things we talk about. Right now at the end of the year, our cash reserves are really high, which you saw in the finance reports. And then we start July of next year, and they're all going to kind of trickle down. And then when the audit's done, we kind of able to do some of our billing and we get more cash. But then we roll around to the end of the year and we kind of go cash poor again as we pay our debt service payments and a lot of our annual bills. And then we slowly but surely work our way back up till the end of the year. And it's just kind of a whole cyclical cycle year over year. Again, here's what we're talking about. This is just a breakdown of our three primary funds. When I say primary funds, that's Fund 1, 2, and 4. These are also the ones that you see in our financial statements that are presented by our auditors. Again, just as a comparison of general fund to the big picture there. And obviously, almost 82% of what we do is in our general fund. What we have here again is just a historical perspective, 23, 24, and 25. You guys are going to ask what the big yellow bar is in fiscal year 24. Again, that's the bond sales. That shows up under all other types or all other sources is the accounting term. And that's why that yellow bar is so high, and it falls back down again in 25. Next slide, again, we talk about expenses. Again, expensive of our three primary funds. You can see, again, general fund being roughly 78% of the total. And again, the historical perspective of that. Now here you see the blue lines, right? Again, all other funds, our construction fund is Fund 6, so that is a little bit more even across the playing field because we're going to expend almost as much money in 25 as we did in 24. Take just a quick peek at how this breaks down our local, state, and federal dollars. Again, in a pie chart there. This graph breaks out student activity fees, so at about $106,000. We look at, again, revenue as a comparison of state and federal. So if you look at actual in 23, you can see our federal revenue is a pretty big piece of the pie. 24, it's a little smaller piece of the pie. And in 25, without any federal dollars, it's only about 4% of the piece of the pie. So again, it gets really, really small. Again, here we break down our expenses by object code. I show this slide just to remind the board that we're 76+% salary and benefits here. So again, keep that in mind for any future conversations. Excuse me. Again, we're looking at the same thing in a historical perspective. You can see the light blue bar here dropped from 24 to 25 based on that $2.9 million that Mr. Benty was talking about earlier in budget cuts. Again, here we look at expenses by program type. So, support services at 23%. Again, this is of the total. So this would be 00, 100, and 200 program codes, instruction, and then facilities, which is our 800 and 900 series program codes. Again, historical perspective based on instruction and program code breakdown. So what we have here is kind of a slide that really shows our revenue, our expenses for 23, again for 24, and pretty much net neutral in 25. Again, this is all of general fund, so both restricted and unrestricted, and then the bottom line is our cumulative fund balance, which you can see is pretty flat, right, with a small drop in 25 based on that 0.4 or 40 basis points drop that we're losing. So we're going to shift gears out of the general fund, move into food service. Again, talk a little bit here. You can see that the green part of this chart is growing over time. So the green represents the federal dollars. Just to remind the board that in 24 we started serving CEP, which is a requirement by the state of Minnesota under the last legislative session, and that CEP programming will grow in 25, which is why that green bar is higher. Again, we look at the expenditure side of things. Again, not a whole lot to share there. Pretty flat overall. And then again, we look at the fund balance, right? So again, projected to lose, hopefully lose a little bit of money in 24, again, to be more in compliance with the state of Minnesota. But then pretty much break even again in fiscal year 25. And unfortunately, that fund balance bar just doesn't want to seem to go south for any reason. So again, we look at community ed. Again, you can see the change in overall revenue, how it has grown from 23 to 24 and into 25. Same with expenses that follow along behind. And again, we look at theirs, again, pretty much break-even programming, revenue over expenses. Spent a little bit more in 23, pretty much break-even in 24, and carried into 25. Again, with a fund balance flat. This picture is a little different, right? You can kind of see that big green bar in 24 that shows the bond sales, and so why the fund balance went way up north, and then how it falls off in fiscal year 25. Debt service, not going to talk a lot about debt service. Again, just for the board to remind them, 24 we paid the last of our debt, 2017A debt in 24. The 25 budget contains the first payment on the 2024 debt for the health and safety bonds that were passed in fiscal year 24. Our internal service fund, again, not a lot of change there, right? We had a great year in 23, put a lot into the fund balance there. As you've heard me say, 24 looks to be roughly break even. Hopefully we can keep it to a positive number without brackets. And again, kind of shooting for that same thing in 25 as well. And then our OPEB trust again, in 24, pretty much a break even there, again, without the implicit rate. The expenses, which is why that black bar is a little higher in 25, has the $200,000+ of implicit rate. And again, this is kind of hard to see here, but again, this is the same summary chart that really shows the fund balance change from 24 to 25. Again, fund balance policy is in the red, and the auditor proverbial recommendations are in the purple. And I, again, want to give a shout out to Brett and Kim and Jill and Delilah and Brenda, who I asked to be here tonight, and they all respectfully told me no. Anyway, I want to give a shout out to them if they happen to be listening. So, that is it. Any questions?
Very good. Board members.
This is discussion time, correct?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Yeah, a constituent sent me this From what I am seeing, you know, with the revenues, except for student fees, I think the revenues are all tax funded, whether it's federal, state, or local. And one of my concerns is that, I got this nice little graph from somebody, you know, disposable income, that's income left after paying the bills. Is that correct? I think. And I know the value of the dollar is declining. What I'm really very concerned about is that we are and have been spending, I think, beyond our means. And this is not being fiscally conservative. You know, I manage my home budget. If I did, I think what we're doing, Mr. Carlander, we get at the state bank, would be chasing after my bounce checks. And yes, I still write checks. I think we need to stop this. If we don't, we're going to have to ask the already overburdened taxpayers for more dollars. I don't think our spending is sustainable. You know, furthermore, it's not our money. And I do feel that we need a halt, and this is to halt some of this, and that includes, you know, new programs, extensions of programs, if these programs are draining our budget. We've got to get back to the basics, reading, writing, math, etc. You know, also music and sports. The last time we, you know, the 2.9 million cuts, we had to eliminate teachers, paras from kindergarten, and a music teacher. I just feel that we need to cut back and stop new spending. That's basically my opinion. Thank you.
For the discussion, board members. Mr. Wolf.
Yeah, I don't know if this is appropriate time or not, but just following up on Ms. Moore's comments, Ms. Moore, I think we're trying to be fiscally responsible, and that's why we cut $2.9 million to essentially balance the budget. So, you know, I don't know if you have other ideas that you've shared with Mr. Gertis and Mr. Benty or not. I think this board is trying to make the difficult decisions and minimize impacts to students. We sat here and we debated and had long discussions on the exercise that Mr. Benty and leadership went through on building reorganization, and we chose not to do that. We've brought that back to the table. So if you have other suggestions that you can share with them, I don't know what they are other than we're trying to balance our budget and do the best we can there.
I just guess I would suggest a moratorium on new programs. And if we have extension of programs that are coming in, I think we need to call a halt to that and just work with, you know, because this is not sustainable. The value of the dollar is going down, and the tax burden on the taxpayers, you know, people have less money to spend. And I've heard, you know, from different people that sometimes they can't make ends meet. I think we've got to tighten our belt, especially with new programs coming in. For instance, if we have the grants coming in, that's fine. But then when the grant runs out, we still have probably the facilitator or sometimes two, which is six-figure salaries. So that's my point. I think we have to start really looking at some of these things and stepping back and saying, I'm not saying any of these programs are bad. But what I am saying is, you know, just by the charts up there, we're spending more than we're making. And I know I can't do that as a homeowner, and because I take care of the budget at home. So that's my point. Thank you.
Mr. Gertis, your perspective on balancing the budget, or?
So just a couple things. So, Ms. Moore, when you said we're spending more than we're making, that is true, right? I think, and that has been the plan all along coming off of the ESSER funds. So, while we're putting money in the bank this year, we'll spend it next year, right? That's been the plan all along, but that's a net neutral. So that's not money ahead. I'm struggling a little bit with the new programs and the fiscal responsibility piece, and asking taxpayers to pay more. I don't believe any of those are super accurate statements. And so I think we need to bring some clarity in whether that's I do that or the board members do that or whatever that is. That's not accurate. And so your constituents, I don't think, have the big picture in mind. They maybe have a picture, but it's not the correct picture. And so I would welcome the opportunity to talk about that sometime, because there's no graph on this presentation that I did that says we're spending more than what we're doing by that much money.
I did have.
So I'm a little concerned there. We talk about grants, right? They don't have that up on there. But that's break even. Oh, I clicked it. Thank you, Brett. So.
But we are spending more than we're
Can
making.
you show me what you're looking at?
What was this 2020, was it 2023, 24, or this was the last one, excuse me, final budget revision, where we were, oops, wait a second, maybe this is the 24, 25, yeah, I was looking at.
So which budget are you in? This year or last year?
24, 25.
Or next year? 24, 25, okay?
Okay, the governmental funds, wait a minute, no,
So
I'm looking here.
NASCO, can you put that back on?
Is it this one?
So, yep, I can bring that back up here, but it's not up on the
Yeah.
screen for everybody else to.
You know, our general fund here, it says total revenue 62,209, excuse me, 62,299,014. And then down there, it's 60, for spending, 62,574.
Yep.
It's at 275,400.
Okay, so what percent of that is that of the total?
Well, but
Point
when I look
zero
at this, we're spending more than we're
Yes.
bringing in, so
Y-
I have a
yep.
problem with that, so. Is the total governmental funds, that come in, it's 76,000 now, that's where, is it over, we're 3 million, over almost 4 million, spending more than we should be for 24, 25, and
Right.
I'm concerned about that.
So, of that number, $3.6 million is in Fund 6, which is construction fund, and I explained that the revenue for that is in 1 year, and the expenses are in the following year. So, that's the way that fund is going to be, which has nothing to do with kids. So, that's just governmental accounting. That's the way the rules work. You are accurate. We are spending $275,400 more based on this budget. That is less than 0.5% of the $62,300,000. That would be like me walking over and handing you a $2 bill. I think that's it.
Thank you. Discussion, board members.
Mr. Bellingham, and I apologize, Ms. Moore, I'm just responding to one of your comments. Do you have any specific cases where we've taken a grant and we've set a program up and the grant funds have run out and then we've continued to fund through general fund? I think that's what you were
Yes.
referring to.
Well,
I
it
think,
was
right?
ESSER funds. With the ESSER funds, I think we did some things, and now we are continuing some of the programs.
Okay.
And with the, yeah.
ESSER
And
funds.
there may be more, but I know ESSER was a big one, so.
Okay, thank you.
But technically, Mr. Gertis, ESSER funds were not grants.
Technically, they were grants.
Grant from.
Right, but, correct me if I'm wrong, but we cut $2.9 million, which we had to do because of those grants.
That's correct.
So all of those expenses were cut because the funding is gone.
And we knew in 2020, when we were told we were going to obtain this money, that in 2024 or 2025, that would end, and we would need to make adjustments at that time. correct?
Oh, yes, that is correct, John,
Yep,
sorry.
yep, nope, that's what I'm saying. So I too am just really concerned with the grant process. Tonight seems to be the night to bash grants or whatever, but the grant process is where we see a need within the district. These ideas are proposed to have a program, enhance the program. It goes to the superintendent for the approval. We write the grant, we get it approved, and those monies go there. And the bottom line is, when the grant runs out, the board does have the final say if that program continues or any portion of that program continues. So to say we're adding stuff and adding programs and things like this with the grant, I see grants as adding enrichment or adding necessary items for our goals, our district goals, and to the enhancement of student learning achievement. That's my perspective of that. But
And John, it also saves taxpayer dollars.
that's correct. Thank you.
Saves local taxpayer dollars.
That is correct. Thank you. So with that,
Mr. Chairman, I don't want the public to get an idea that we are misspending or
that's
not being conservative in trying to maintain a budget that's sustainable. We are. This board did vote to make some very large reductions. We did not take it from our reserve fund, which many districts are doing. And I applaud this board for passing that, even though we had a couple of people that did not join us in that vote. We had a reform measure here, a reorg measure, I should say, trying to save money on our buildings. We had people on this board that did not join us in supporting that. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I'm just saying these measures have been brought forward. And I think it's a misstatement to say that this board is spending more than what we have in available to us. We are right on the line and trying to stay on that line, keeping us in the black. And I thank you, Scott, for providing those. I mean, you're doing a good job of trying to keep everything very clear to all the board and very conservative in making decisions. I thank you, and I just think it's the wrong idea to try to say that this board is overspending. That is wrong. That's not true. It needs to be clarified.
Thank you. We do have a motion and a second for approval of the fiscal year 2025 adopted budget. Last call for discussion.
Chair, I just have one comment. It
Dr.
would be
Robichaud.
Fiscally irresponsible if we didn't adjust the budget based on declining enrollment, which is a big factor in why we make cuts. If we maintain the same budget with declining enrollment, that would be fiscally irresponsible. And that we have made adjustments based on that and continue to make adjustments based on declining enrollment. If the other part, we always talk about one part of the equation. Let's talk about advocating for the legislature to fund education at the level that it should fund. So I would encourage you, Mr. Moore, for your constituents to advocate at the legislature for appropriate funding for public education.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Olson.
yeah, Jerry brought up something which I've said before, is that if they would have funded the mandates or eliminated the unfunded mandates and also cross subsidies, I think that we would be flush with money. Scott, would that be true?
Very true.
Okay.
If inflation would have kept up, we'd have over $4 million annually in added revenue. Think about what we could do with $4 million every single year.
Okay, any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of the motion for approval of the fiscal year 2025 adopted budget signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion passes 6-1. 10R, consider approval of updated 5-year projections. Mr. Gertis. Oh, sorry, I need a motion. I'll entertain a motion for approval of the updated 5-year projection.
So moved.
Thank you, Dr. Robichaud. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Steves. Mr. Gertis.
Thank you, John. This will be the last one for me, and then we'll sit down. I presented this real quickly at the work session back the first part of June. Just a couple things I want to point out again on here. I mentioned this earlier, but if you look at the line that says 1% increase in the basic formula, $243,000. Okay, again, that assumes we maintain every student in every classroom, and that doesn't happen. So back to Jerry, your spot, and Richard to your spot. $486,000 doesn't get us very far, right? The other thing I would just point out on here is with declining enrollment and no increase in revenue, we are a district that will cut every single year. And so I think the constituents need to know that. And this board has done a very good job of maintaining our fund balance, which some districts have not done. And so I want to say thank you to the board too for that. Because I could be up here having a whole different story and a whole different set of dilemmas, like the district where my kid goes to school, where they're in SOD in a matter of a year. So thank you for that.
Discussion. Mr. Wolf.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Gertis, so I know we're just wrapping up the end of this fiscal year, like literally days away. Just tell me, based on what you know tonight, what would you project we will be having budget cut discussions for next year, the following year, right? So we're going to start the 24-25 school year in a
Monday
week.
morning.
Monday morning. We will get to January, February, and as you mentioned, I mean, it's just simple math. If you don't have increased revenues and you got declining enrollment, the numbers have to go down. What do you anticipate tonight that we would be looking at for budget cuts? What are you projecting?
So based on this data,
Yep.
and based on a 10.75% fund balance, which is slightly lower than where we projected to end,
Yep.
we will need to cut $616,000 for fiscal year 26.
Okay. So that's all things equal, which we know they won't be.
Right.
I mean, let's be honest, it's
Yep.
not,
That number is as
written
good as it
stone.
is till we all walk out of the building
Right.
tonight.
But, okay, thank you. I appreciate
Yep.
it.
And also, Mr. Gertis, that number, if I remember from previous meetings, some is a carryover from this year as well. Am I correct on that?
This is a straight budget cut, not a fund balance number.
Right,
So,
So we
Ask your
balanced our
question.
budget last year, so we did not have any debt carryover to 25, correct?
the money that we are going to hypothetically be positive in for 24 carries over to 25. With using that money in 25, we're going to lose a little bit, $275,000, right?
Yes.
And then in 26, in order to maintain 10.75%,
Right.
we would need to cut $616,000. If we wanted to maintain the 10.92% that we were projected to finish at the end of 25, we would have to cut a little bit more to get that extra 17 basis points.
Okay. That's where I got my data
Yeah.
from, so thanks for.
I think we're saying the same thing.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that, yes. Further discussion?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Olson?
clarification, the ESSER funds, they're gone at June 30th, right?
Yes, as of June 30th, the ESSER funds will
That's
be
it.
done,
Okay,
finished.
finished. Okay, thank you.
Last call for discussion. We do have a motion for approval of the updated 5-year projection. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Gertis, for the 14 agenda items there, and Mr. Martindale for attending as well. Let's move on to 10S. Consider approval of Resolution 24-36, calling the school district general election. This is a roll call item, and Mr. Benty, it says here, you are the presenter.
Yes, so every 2 years, we have a school board election. They're on a cycle. We are on an even year cycle. So not only this fall will we have a presidential election and all of our House and Senate, I shouldn't say all, but many of our House and Senate seats up, but we will also have a school board election for 3 seats. The resolution here outlines what needs to be done and when it needs to be done by, mainly for our clerk, which I believe is Miss Steves. There is also then a portion on page 2 that gives a template for what the ballot will look like.
So with this resolution, and I'm hoping the answer is no, I'm not expected to read the entire resolution.
No.
Okay.
No.
Twice.
Twice.
Twice, yes.
Okay.
In Spanish, too.
Very good. Okay, so do we have a motion in a second? I forgot that.
You do not, I
Thank
believe.
you.
I will motion for
Okay.
approval.
Motion for approval of Resolution 24-36. Mr. Wolf has motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Boudreau. Discussion. Anything further here? Discussion. Let's call for discussion. Hearing none. Ms. Steves, please.
Linda Boudreau,
Aye.
Linda Moore,
Aye.
Richard Olson,
Aye.
Jerry Robichaud.
Aye.
Cassie Steves, aye. Chad Wolf,
Aye.
John Bellingham.
Aye.
Passes 7-0.
Thank you. Moving on to 10R, consider approval of Resolution 24-37, establishing dates for filing affidavits of candidacy for election. Motion for approval of Resolution 24-37, please.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Boudreau. Second.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Discussion. Mr. Benty, once again.
So this resolution is not required by law, but we're doing it anyway just to be transparent. On this, it gives the dates for filing. So the election will be on November 5th of this year. There are 3 school board seats that are open, and they are terms for 4 years. Filing will open on July 30th and will close on August 13th of this year. They can file here in the district office, and there's a $2 filing fee paid prior to 5 p.m. on August 13th of this year.
Very good. Questions or discussion? Questions or discussion? Questions or discussion? Discussion. Ms. Steves, please.
Linda Boudreau,
Aye.
Linda Moore,
Aye.
Richard Olson,
Aye.
Jerry Robichaud.
Aye.
Cassie Steves, aye. Chad Wolf,
Aye.
John Bellingham.
Aye.
Passes 7-0.
Thank you. 10U, reorganization update. Mr. Benty.
Yes. So reorganization committee continues to go strong. We continue to be at about 25 people in our meetings. We meet every other Tuesday. We've had 3 meetings so far. We will have an optional meeting tomorrow. So in our meetings, the first one was more of a understanding the issue at hand, understanding the charge that the school board has given me. The second meeting was touring Roosevelt, Roosevelt, the ALC site, and McKinley. And the tomorrow's optional meeting will be a tour of the middle school, the Lincoln Elementary, and Jefferson Elementary. Our next meeting will then, official meeting will be next Tuesday. The board the committee has had really good discussion. There's been a lot of participation in the meeting. Good questions are being asked. They're starting to settle in on some of the ideas, understanding how we use our physical space and how it has changed since they were in school, or the needs of physical space and the differences between when they were in school and what schooling looks like today has been definitely a learning curve for a lot of people. So a lot of discussions around how can we continue to have declining enrollment, but yet we're still using the same number of classrooms. So a lot of discussions around special education and offerings, around EL and offerings, and the spaces that those programs require. we should be settling in on some ideas and should have probably 3 or more options that are brought to the school board here at the end of summer, beginning of fall.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Venti. Agenda item number 11, dates to remember. July 8th, 2024, 5:30 PM work session here. July 15th, 2024, 7:30 AM, virtual finance committee. July 22nd, 2024, regular board meeting at 5:30 PM. Agenda item number 12, could I entertain a motion to move to a closed session as permitted by Minnesota Statute 13D.05 subdivision 3A for the superintendent evaluation? Do we have a motion for approval?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Boudreau. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Steves. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. We'll move to closed session. I'm going to, let's go 5 minutes here. Let's be back here at 8:35, please.